So there's two ways you can look at it. It's either he wasn't what he says he was, but he didn't say anything, or he was so good, because the good people in the Mafia you never heard about.
No. So everybody that you hear about and you see, they're there for a purpose. They are egotistical.
Glory.
They think they're legitimate. Yep. Paul Castellano, John Gotti. Those are probably, like, Paul Castellano thought he was a legitimate businessman. I don't know what John Gotti thought.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Growing up, we see our parents, as well as other adults, through child's eyes. They are caregivers, they are coaches, and they represent unconditional love. Children put their parents on a pedestal, believing that they were always the way they were in front of us. What most people forget is that there was a life your parents lived that happened before your birth. They have made poor choices, they have made mistakes, and they were normal young people, subject to all the world has to offer. Our parents are able to slip into their respective roles because of the love for their children. What they did in the past has very little bearing on the fact that they want the best life they can provide. The dichotomy of individuals is never so succinctly personified as in those that raised us. I'm Kevin Donaldson here with Mike Failace, and welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's what we do here and that's the stories we highlight. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, and now you can join. Don't forget to ring the bell so you can get notified of all of our new content, and follow us on social media so you can find out what we're up to. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, I've been looking so forward to this one.
Long-awaited episode.
I've been looking so forward to this. When I read this whole book just in preparation for you. We welcome Angelo Pisano to discuss the suffering of a mob daughter. Angela's father was a dangerous man, but to you, he's just dad.
Yes.
So thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you for having me and believing in my story.
Oh, I do. It's a wonderful story. We're going to get into it. Before we go any further, let's give a big shout out to our marquee sponsor. That's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as police, but we do trust them. So go to toyotaofhackensack.com and let them find you a car. So now, Angela, each week we take a question from our audience. This one's coming from Lunella_Sista. I pulled this one for you because I think you're going to have a pretty interesting answer.
I think I know her. I think I went to school with her.
Lunella Sister?
Lunella Sister.
Sister. Who is the most dangerous person you've ever met? Angela?
For me, all the people I met through my father were very nice to me. So according to what I hear and a few incidents of what I visibly saw, God rest his soul, would have to be Bobby Caberts.
Why? What made him so dangerous? Or what, from what you heard?
Well, he was, most of these guys will have a switch that will flip. You never knew with him.
We're talking
ever.
Mafia members. We're talking gangsters.
And he went as far as to do this with women in public places. So at the Turtle Brook one night in West Orange, I was in there with girlfriends and some guy friends. He was with an acquaintance friend of mine, dating her, and she didn't do a thing. And it was well across the room, and Bobby Caberts just flipped. And Jimmy Randazzo was there that night, God rest his soul, also dangerous man, and took him out. And I know Jimmy's parents, and I knew Jimmy, and he said, Ange, you guys got to go, because this could go outside. And Jimmy was also dangerous that way.
Dangerous men, that's the problem. Hang around dangerous men. You never know. Yeah, you never know when it's going to go like that.
Yeah.
Mike, what do you think?
I'm going to stay vanilla on this one.
You're gonna have to join the subscription channel to find out exactly what the context of that was, because we had a whole discussion about it.
I'm going to say the most dangerous person in my life was my father. He was the most loving person, and was the greatest father. But if you stepped off, he was going to step off.
So his father, Mike and I will go at each other from time to time. And I remember I've met his father. I've known his father for 20 some odd years.
Before the podcast.
The podcast. And then after we were doing the show, I go, he tells me his father's coming to an event we were doing. And I said, is he going to punch me?
Right? That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because like I said, the most loving, the greatest father anybody could ask for. But you knew if you stepped off, he just gave me that look. Mm-hmm. He never hit me. Well, never hit me maliciously. Mm-hmm. I deserved every hit I got, but he just gave me that look.
And that was it.
And that was it. You knew you did wrong, and you knew you had to stop doing whatever you were doing.
I was a little afraid of your father, but since he found out I was breaking his son's chops, I'm now his hero. So.
Yeah, when you said, I'm sorry for breaking your son's chops, he goes, you want them, you can have them. Just take them.
But, I grew up, Angelo, we've had a lot of discussions about this. I grew up around some really, really dangerous people. And it was never the guys who were perceived as dangerous that I worried about. Because to me, I can see them coming. Listen, you're going to break my leg? That'll heal in 6 weeks. You're going to break my fingers? It's a minor inconvenience. You're going to give me a shot in the head? Maybe I'll hear the bang and smell some smoke? Don't care. The most dangerous person I ever met, Mike and I met him together, is a guy named Matt Cox. Matt Cox at one time was on the FBI's most wanted list. Now, Matt is a friend of mine, okay? I talk to him not frequently because I keep my distance, but Matt is one of these very odd geniuses in this world who just like to play. That's all they like to do. And he's a small, unassuming guy. There's nothing violent about him. He doesn't have a violent bone in his body. But for fun, he will cripple you financially. He had stolen something in neighborhoods. They don't even know how much he stole from the government, but they think it's upwards of about $50 million through, you got to read.
Mortgage frauds.
Yeah, mortgage frauds, identity theft. And he'll tell you he ratted his way down to 12 years because he was getting 25 years.
White collar crime.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a white collar crime. But he's just one of these guys that likes to figure out the puzzle. Even when he was in prison, he figured out how to make money by writing guys' stories. And he wrote the book War Dogs that went into the movies.
Yeah.
So he just figures stuff out. And then when he got out, he got into the podcasting world and he was on American Greed and all sorts of stuff. But when I walked out of it, and we did his show in his house, I walked out of there and I checked my wallet. I did.
You want to make sure.
And we're friends with some guys who were gangsters or whatever they were.
We're gangster, crooked cop, and mortgage broker, mortgage.
And he's the guy I'm afraid of. That's the weird part because
he's brilliant.
Yeah.
He really is.
Well, there's different types of fear, right, that we didn't talk about. So when you asked me who's the dangerous guy, interesting. We have two genders right here, right? So from my gender, three, the vanilla gender.
Vanilla is the word of the day, kids.
So from my aspect of the question or perspective, interestingly, you saw a man like Bobby or Jimmy, and people knew. However, you didn't know what they were going to do in a crowd. You didn't know what they were going to do anywhere. And as a woman, believe it or not, women are usually protected by, their boyfriends or their mob husbands. Do they fight? Well, everybody fights.
But that's old school, though. It's, right. You keep the family out of it.
Right. So from my perspective, that's dangerous to me because I grew up with a father who was immensely disciplined and controlled.
But
scary.
Yes. So
are women protected by name also? You know what I'm saying? In your situation, growing up the way you grew up, they knew who your father was. So you were kind of protected. You were shielded from that.
Yes. So with my inside world, we would go into a club down the shore, surf club, Temptations, all the clubs DJs. Back in the day. And someone would say, we had the VIP, and someone would say something like, she's Larry Martin's daughter, And in certain circles, the name matters.
Yeah.
And then in other circles, like in New York, if I was in Little Italy or wherever I was in Newark or Belleville, they knew my father was with all the families. He didn't really belong to one family, but he was a Genovese guy for years and years. So that pulled a lot of weight because the Genovese family was about making money, tax-free money, lots of it. They weren't about killing. They would do a sit-down any day.
Well, Larry Martin, we're going to get into a lot about Larry Martin, but Lunesta_sister, thank you so much for sending that question in. Keep sending in your questions, and we're going to try to get them on the air.
And I'll see you at our high school reunion.
So you handed me this book. It's a weird kind of introduction to us. I met you through Paul Simmons, who's been on the show. Your husband Joe works with him, and I remember I get the phone call from Paul. You got this. This is a great story. You got to listen to this story, and gets us in contact. Now I had to go through a conduit. I had to have a sit down with her husband.
My husband.
He was the maven, and I talked to him and everything, and then I get a call from Angela, and I think the first time we talked, we probably went for about an hour and a half.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that, because I grew up in that area with a lot of those types of people, so I understand the lifestyle behind it. But you grew up in a household with a guy who was invisible, like a true old school invisible mobster. So, what's your earliest childhood memory of something's different about my father? Because kids can tell.
So kids have a sense. I'm a teacher, and kids definitely have a sense. So we were, it was 1967, 65, maybe 65. Maybe I was like 5. And my mother got up and went to work every day, and my father got up and, was home. Sometimes he would go out in the afternoon, but he was always dressed suit, French cuffs, beautiful clothes. And my mother got vacation, by 67, I was 7, she got vacation. You hear her talking about sick days, there was no PTO, sick days, personal time, that kind of thing. And my father never really spoke about, any of that. And so I kind of sensed something was a little different. And we lived in a middle-class town. Rutherford was middle class with some affluent areas, but basically middle class. But we had people coming to the house. My father didn't change flat tires. He didn't wash cars unless he felt like it that day. So I knew something wasn't right, like when I went to other houses, because
the other parents,
there was always cash around our house.
Your mother wasn't making that much money.
Yeah. She actually was, though, in the eye, on paper,
Which
that's
actually gets back to the fact that your father is not only smart, but brilliant, because he had a sugar mama.
Yes. He never owned anything. So never owned anything, never had a credit card, never. No.
Now your father is, I did my research on trying to look for your father, and your father, Lorenzo Martino, AKA Larry Martin.
Mm-hmm.
He's hard to find, which either means, so there's two ways you can look at it. It's either he wasn't what he says he was, but he didn't say anything, or he was so good, because the good people in the Mafia you never heard about.
No. So everybody that you hear about and you see, they're there for a purpose. They are egotistical.
Glory.
They think they're legitimate. Paul Castellano, John Gotti. Those are probably, like, Paul Castellano thought he was a legitimate businessman. I don't know what John Gotti thought, but he was the worst of that.
It's called megalomania.
Yeah. Men like Richie Biardo, the Boot, Jip, Ray, Angelo, DeCarlo, out of order. These men drove Chevys. They wore
Jip DeCarlo
chinos
of Four Seasons fame.
Yes.
So everybody knows the name Jip DeCarlo. And
yes. These guys, they were invisible. And it goes back to even back in the day when at Columbus Circle, Joe Colombo got shot and lived 7 years. And he thought he was a legitimate businessman. He was on the TV for the Italian civil rights. And he did this unity thing. And we had to go, my mom and I. But my father was like, he's a boss. And we don't exist.
And I know I read this in a book. You were at Columbus Circle.
Yes.
when Joe Colombo
Yes, we had to go.
ended his Mafia career.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but back to your original question. So my father, don't forget, started in 1934, maybe, because he started boxing at 15. And that was his gateway to the rackets. And he
So a lot of them got started in boxing.
still do. And so he...
I always say that's why you never gamble on boxing.
Yeah.
lots of them were fixed.
Yeah.
So...
La, 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 la.
Yeah, you got to know who, right? So he, that was his gateway. And he is very old school. I mean, he died at 99 in 2014, so he would be over 100. He was not of the modern mentality, which is why lots of the modern management rules of the Mafia did not apply to him. And people don't understand that. And why would they? I only did because I lived in this life. It's an organization. And
there's a
it has a
pecking order.
hierarchy.
Yeah,
Yes, there's a
order.
hierarchy.
Absolutely.
And there's rules. And it's tribal. But he was part of that. He wasn't a Mustache Pete, Sicilian and all of that. But he worked with them. But he was part of that. So you didn't hear of the people from his time too much.
So he and what I read in the book, and we're going to get to the book. It's called Welcome to the Family, which I got a working copy right here so I could prep. I just want to show everybody. It's a really interesting look into the mind of somebody who would have been if he were to go into the legitimate world, he would have been successful.
Very.
All right. The fact that he didn't go into the legitimate world, he was still successful. But he rose I read this in here where he only did one prison stint.
Yes.
And that was early on before you were glinting his eye.
The war years.
The war years. Yeah. People don't understand that it's, you're talking almost 80 years ago now.
Yeah.
In those times, in order to buy certain goods, you had to get a stamp, a ration stamp.
Yeah.
And I guess they were very easily counterfeited.
So you could buy them online. There were booklets, kind of like the stamps you got at banks back in the day, and you got China, but
to buy chocolate, to buy
like green stamps.
Yeah. And sugar, gas. So everybody wanted gas, and he counterfeited with his partners at the time who were in Chicago. It was around so the war started in 39. We didn't get in World War II till I think 41. So I think it was over in 45. So this must have been around 44, somewhere in there. I know he was working with Willie Moretti at the time and whoever else was involved then, but I wasn't listening too much at 13 years old. And when he was telling the stories. So, yeah, they counterfeited, and his partners were in Chicago, and he would not fly. But he did because it made him a wealthy man. So he would fly out there, and my mother couldn't warn him. Obviously, there's no cell phones or anything. Got off the plane in Chicago. FBI were waiting. Federal. It's federal. I mean, this is how people were eating. And they bought the judge off, and they did not do too much time. And as his phrase, it was prison. Prison was wide open. We were okay. It was good.
Right. You're not doing the hard time.
You're not doing hard time. You're making the gravy.
They take care of themselves in there.
Yeah. So, but my father had a moral side, I think, because he would say, the kids, they were hungry. St. Lucy's, the kids were hungry. He said, so the first place I went was Father Junta. And I said, here, go feed the kids, Father. And he took the books, and he knew who Larry Martin was, but he went and he fed those kids. I'm not making excuses.
Sometimes you got to bend the rules to do what's right. And that's the truth. Even as police officers, there are certain times throughout our career where there's the letter of the law, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% correct. For instance, I'll give you a perfect for instance. How many times did you catch a 16-year-old kid with a little joint?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to bring that kid in, there is serious consequences to arresting a kid for a little joint, something that all of us have probably done throughout our lives. So you stomp it out and you give them a warning, and hopefully that's enough to scare them a little straight. So what's right is not always right. So that's
Well, you're talking the gray area, right?
I always said there was a fine line between good and bad, but the line is straight, but the gray area kind of serpentines around the line. Yeah. You know, you could be on both sides of that line and still be doing the right thing. And
in my father's business, and again, I'm not making excuses for his life. He chose it. And I'm not saying that what he did was correct, but he was not an enforcer. He was not a hitman. He was not muscle. He was extremely smart. So the mafia uses sociopaths and psychopaths for cutting up bodies.
Yeah.
There is
the strong arm stuff.
There is no doubt there is severe violence and torture going on. However, you signed up for that because it's a tribal.
Well, everybody has a role.
It's a tribal hierarchy, and you live by tribal rules. But he was a businessman.
Every organization, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate, has roles that are assigned.
Exactly.
This person packages the good. This person does the accounting, and this person does. You know, some people do the grunt work. Some people got to dig ditches. Right. Other people get to work with the money.
Right.
The mob is no different, and that's something that people got to understand.
Well, I think what people don't understand, though, is it's truly in business to make money, tax-free money.
Yeah.
So they put people where they belong, and then you have a choice, too. More in my father's day, you have a choice. But my father was smart, a quick story. So he always had tailored clothes, my mom and dad. And his tailor, not his first tailor, but his other tailor was in Lyndhurst on Kingsland Avenue. And his name was Carlo. And Carlo was a huge gambler in the 70s.
Fantastic story in the book about this.
Huge gambler. Now, my father was he loan sharked, but that was not what he did. And Carlo was not doing this with my father. He was from Italy. They would go to the clubs, and his loan shark was probably a guy from Italy. So my father was waiting for his camel hair coat, and it wasn't done. And Carlo, Larry, it'll be done. And my father got mad and very controlled. Angelo, let's go. We're going down Newark for pastries, and we're going to stop and see Carlo. So we went in, and his mother was always sitting in the shop on a, dining room chair. And my father would always go over to hers. And I didn't speak Italian, but my father did fluently, many dialects. And he said, Senora, and he was talking to her. And then he went over to Carlo, and he, where's my coat? And Carlo said, it's not ready. And, so I didn't notice anything. So he said a few words to Carlo in Italian. I understood some of the curse words, stroons, different things. So fangul. So we leave. We get in the car and we leave. And my father looks at me, and we're going down Newark now to Catherine's Bakery. And he says to me, so I took a razor and I sliced up all his textiles. And I said, what did you do that for? And he said, Angela, I've been with this guy over 7 years. I pay him in cash. I tip him. He said, treat him well. He said, and you make me wait. He said, and what am I going to do? I can't break his legs and I can't break his arms. He said, but I could hit him in the pocket. You want to, screw with me? Can't make money now. Go buy all new textiles. And I learned that day, it was actually a pretty good way to handle things. His coat was ready. His mother got her $100 bill when we went back. And she was always like, Lorenzo, hugging him, And then when we walked out, he said to Carlo, you touch that money, and he was cursing at Carlo, you'll take it from your mother, that kind of thing, and I'm not cursing, but he was cursing at Carlo. And Carlo was nervous. And everything was always on time. Matter of fact, about a week early. So